Have you ever noticed how some relationships feel like trying to dance with someone who's constantly moving in the opposite direction? One person stepping forward precisely when the other steps back, creating this exhausting choreography that somehow never resolves. What if this wasn't just bad timing or poor communication, but something far more systematic? This is what the unspoken signs. Your relationship is trapped in the anxious avoidant loop reveals. Understanding these hidden patterns might finally explain why so many relationships feel like emotional tug-of-war matches that nobody ever wins. Here's what makes this loop so devastatingly effective at capturing people. It operates almost entirely beneath conscious awareness, like a psychological autopilot written in childhood and activated the moment intimacy reaches a certain threshold. The anxious avoidant loop is essentially a self-reinforcing system where two incompatible coping strategies collide and create a predictable cycle. One person's attachment system hyperactivates, craving closeness, seeking reassurance, monitoring for signs of rejection. The other person's attachment system deactivates, suppressing needs, creating distance, protecting against perceived engulfment. Each person's solution triggers the other person's core fear. The anxious partner moves toward connection, which makes the avoidant partner feel trapped, so they withdraw, which terrifies the anxious partner into pursuing harder, which makes the avoidant partner retreat further. Round and round it goes, sometimes for years, creating what researchers describe with clinical precision as especially unstable satisfaction over time, which is academic language for an emotional roller coaster that leaves both people exhausted, confused, and wondering if relationships are supposed to hurt this much. But here's what most people miss entirely. The loop often begins with intense chemistry that feels like destiny. The anxious partner sees the avoidant partner as confident, stable, mysterious, someone whose validation would finally prove worthiness. The avoidant partner experiences the anxious partner as warm, admiring, emotionally expressive, someone who makes them feel wanted without requiring too much vulnerability initially. Both people unconsciously recognize familiar emotional patterns from childhood. The inconsistent care, the chasing of love, the feeling of being too much or too needy. These aren't warning signs to the nervous system. They're recognition signals. The brain whispers, "This feels like home." And that intensity gets mistaken for soulmate energy, for unprecedented connection, for finally meeting someone who understands. But it's not connection. It's the activation of old wounds mistaken for chemistry. The relationship hasn't even really begun, and the ending is already written in invisible ink, which raises a fascinating question about what actually constitutes compatibility. So, how does someone recognize they're trapped in this loop? The signs are rarely obvious at first. They accumulate gradually, like psychological sediment, until suddenly the relationship feels fundamentally unstable, but nobody can quite articulate why. Here's the first unspoken sign. The chase and retreat becomes the relationship's normal rhythm. One person initiates deep talks, asks where things are going, seeks constant reassurance, sends multiple texts when worried, checks social media obsessively, overthinks every pause in communication. The other person needs significant space after conflicts or emotional conversations, disappears into work or hobbies or their phone when things feel too intense, becomes less responsive precisely when the other person needs more connection. The cycle plays out with mathematical precision. Closeness happens, the avoidant partner pulls back, the anxious partner escalates, the avoidant partner retreats further. Eventually, a fragile reconnection occurs, and then the entire sequence repeats. What looks like relationship problems is actually a predictable dance where both partners are executing their programmed steps perfectly. But there's a more subtle indicator that often goes completely unnoticed. The second unspoken sign appears in the narrative each person tells themselves about the relationship. The anxious partner's internal script runs on repeat, "Not loved enough." If the relationship ends, it proves unworthiness. Must fight for this or be abandoned. Everything gets interpreted through this lens. A delayed text becomes rejection. Needing space becomes abandonment. Any distance feels like emotional starvation. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner's script plays a different but equally rigid soundtrack: can never do enough. Being criticized or controlled, overwhelmed and judged constantly. Every request for connection feels like an accusation. Every expression of need registers as pressure. The relationship becomes a battlefield where both people are fighting enemies that don't actually exist, just the ghosts of old attachment wounds. The arguments that emerge from these conflicting scripts have a particular flavor. They're about time, space, and texting frequency with an intensity that seems disproportionate to the actual issues, which brings up the third unspoken sign: constant friction over seemingly trivial logistics. How often to text or call becomes a relationship-defining issue. How much time should be spent together versus apart generates endless negotiation. One partner wants more shared plans, the other guards solo time fiercely, and both feel simultaneously misunderstood and attacked. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. The anxious partner reads reduced contact as rejection, as evidence that the relationship is failing, as confirmation of their deepest fear. The avoidant partner experiences requests for more contact as intrusion, as loss of autonomy, as the beginning of engulfment. Neither interpretation is objectively true. They're both attachment-filtered perceptions. But when two people are experiencing fundamentally different realities, compromise becomes nearly impossible. The anxious partner needs more connection to feel secure. The avoidant partner needs more distance to feel safe. These needs are mutually exclusive, which creates a zero-sum dynamic where someone always loses. And this sets up perhaps the most confusing pattern in the entire loop. The fourth unspoken sign is emotional whiplash after moments of closeness. After a great date, a deep late-night conversation, physical intimacy, or any experience of genuine vulnerability, something predictable happens. The avoidant partner pulls back, goes quiet, seems emotionally hungover, suddenly focuses intensely on work or hobbies or anything that creates distance. Researchers call these deactivating strategies, automatic responses that restore the avoidant person's sense of autonomy after intimacy threatens it. The anxious partner, meanwhile, experiences complete confusion. Things were so close yesterday. What changed? What did they do wrong? Why is the partner now distant? The natural response is to double down on seeking reassurance, which of course makes the avoidant partner feel more pressured, which triggers more withdrawal, which escalates the anxious partner's panic. The cycle activates most intensely precisely when things were going well, which creates this maddening dynamic where closeness itself becomes the threat. Many anxious partners report feeling more anxious when things are going well than when things are obviously troubled because they're waiting for the inevitable withdrawal, and this anticipation often becomes self-fulfilling. But there's an even subtler pattern that reveals the loop's presence. The fifth unspoken sign is that both people feel weirdly relieved right after fights. This seems paradoxical at first. Why would conflict produce relief? Here's the psychology. The anxious partner thinks, at least the fight proves they still care enough to engage. At least there's emotion here, even if it's negative. Pursuit, even angry pursuit, feels better than being ignored. The avoidant partner thinks, at least the fight bought some space. At least expectations are lowered temporarily. Conflict creates the distance they need without requiring them to explicitly ask for it, which would involve vulnerability they're not comfortable with. So fights serve a function for both people, which is why the relationship can feel oddly stable despite being characterized by high drama. The fights are releasing pressure, resetting the system, allowing the loop to continue. And this creates another fascinating pattern. The sixth unspoken sign shows up in how apologies and promises function, or rather, don't function. The couple has heartfelt talks. Maybe they even agree on specific changes. The anxious partner promises to give more space. The avoidant partner promises to communicate more. Both people genuinely mean it in the moment. But under stress, when attachment systems activate, both snap back into their programmed roles. The anxious partner pursues despite promising not to. The avoidant partner withdraws despite promising to stay engaged. These aren't moral failures. They're nervous system responses that override conscious intention. The loop operates below the level of willpower, which is why trying harder rarely changes anything. The pattern persists despite both people hating it, despite both people wanting something different, despite endless conversations about what should change. And this brings up perhaps the most insidious aspect of the entire dynamic. The seventh unspoken sign is that neither person feels truly secure, even on good days. The anxious partner's emotional state relies heavily on the other person's mood and attention level. Calm only lasts as long as reassurance flows, then quickly destabilizes again. There's constant scanning for signs of rejection, constant monitoring of the relationship's health, constant need for evidence that things are okay. The avoidant partner only feels safe when there's sufficient emotional distance. Independence and detachment become the primary coping tools. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Needing someone feels like weakness. So they maintain protective walls even during intimate moments, always keeping part of themselves unreachable. Neither strategy creates actual security. Both people are living in various states of threat activation, just expressing it differently. The anxious partner's nervous system is screaming danger, abandonment imminent, while the avoidant partner's nervous system is screaming danger, engulfment imminent. And when two people are in chronic threat states, the relationship becomes less about connection and more about managing anxiety, which explains the final unspoken sign. The relationship feels addictive but unsafe. There's high drama, big fights, tearful reunions, intense makeups. There's instability, constantly questioning whether things are okay, even when nothing objectively wrong is happening. Long-term, this leads to exhaustion, burnout, and a sense that the relationship is somehow essential, but also destroying well-being. Many people trapped in this loop describe other relationships as feeling boring by comparison. Healthier, more secure connections lack the intensity, the emotional highs and lows, the constant activation. The nervous system has been trained to associate love with chaos, so peace registers as absence of feeling rather than presence of safety. This is perhaps the most tragic aspect of the loop. It creates such intense neurochemical responses that actually healthy relationships feel wrong. The addiction isn't to the person, it's to the pattern itself. Online communities are filled with stories of people suddenly recognizing themselves in descriptions of the anxious avoidant loop. Reddit posts describing years of hot and cold dynamics and feeling like going crazy until learning about attachment theory. TikTok videos showing one partner triple texting and checking last seen while the other ignores messages and zones out after closeness. The pattern is so consistent that people often describe reading about it and feeling seen for the first time, finally having language for an experience that felt uniquely personal but is actually remarkably universal. However, there's an important distinction between recognition and transformation. Some content creators oversimplify the loop, turning it into relationship astrology, where avoidant people become villains and anxious people become victims. This misses the crucial point. Both people are trapped. Both are suffering. Both are running strategies that made sense in childhood but create pain in adulthood. The anxious partner isn't wrong for wanting connection. The avoidant partner isn't wrong for needing space. The problem is that their nervous systems are operating according to incompatible programs, and neither program allows for the flexibility required for genuine intimacy. Breaking the loop requires both people to recognize their role in maintaining it, which brings up what's actually possible here. Here's what to do if any of these unspoken signs feel familiar. First, recognize the loop without judgment. This pattern isn't evidence of moral failing or relationship doom. It's evidence of two attachment systems colliding in predictable ways. Understanding the mechanism reduces shame and blame, which creates space for actual change. Second, both people need to do individual work on their attachment patterns. The anxious partner learns self-soothing, builds a life outside the relationship, practices not chasing every deactivation, develops tolerance for uncertainty without immediately seeking reassurance. The avoidant partner learns to name emotions, stays present a bit longer during discomfort, communicates need for space without punishing withdrawal, gradually increases capacity for vulnerability. Neither of these changes happens quickly. They require consistent practice over time, often with therapeutic support. Third, if both people are willing, couples work can help slow down the loop. This involves creating explicit agreements about space, texting, conflict repair. It means developing language for when attachment systems are activating so conversations can happen about the pattern rather than within the pattern. It requires both people to recognize their triggers and take responsibility for their responses. However, here's the difficult truth. If one or both partners won't work on their attachment style, the loop usually continues or gets worse. The patterns are too deeply embedded to shift through willpower alone. Change requires both awareness and committed practice. Many relationships end because one person recognizes the loop and wants to change it, while the other person either doesn't see it or isn't willing to do the work. Fourth, consider whether the relationship can actually become secure or whether it's fundamentally incompatible. Some anxious avoidant pairings successfully shift toward more security when both people are highly motivated and get professional support. Others cannot, because the patterns are too entrenched or because the core incompatibility runs too deep. There's genuine grief in recognizing that love alone doesn't fix attachment mismatches. Two people can deeply care about each other while also being wrong for each other. That's not romantic failure, that's psychological reality. And sometimes the most loving choice is to release someone whose attachment pattern fundamentally conflicts with well-being rather than spending years trying to force incompatibility into connection. Fifth, if leaving the relationship, do the internal work before entering the next one. Otherwise, the same pattern will emerge with a different person. The anxious partner will find another avoidant partner because that's what the nervous system recognizes as love. The avoidant partner will find another anxious partner because that's who provides admiration without requiring uncomfortable vulnerability. The loop isn't about the specific people, it's about the underlying patterns. Those patterns will reproduce themselves until they're consciously interrupted and transformed. This is why people often describe having the same relationship over and over with different faces. They're bringing the same attachment programming to each new connection. The emotional truth beneath all of this is both challenging and liberating. The anxious avoidant loop isn't rare. It's one of the most common relationship dynamics, which explains why so many people recognize themselves in these descriptions. It's not evidence of being broken or damaged. It's evidence of having learned particular survival strategies in childhood that no longer serve in adulthood. The loop persists, not because people are choosing poorly, but because nervous systems are recognizing familiar patterns and mistaking that recognition for compatibility. Breaking free requires seeing the pattern clearly, understanding both people's role in maintaining it, and making conscious choices that feel wrong initially because they contradict deeply embedded programming. It requires believing that relationships can feel different, calmer, more stable, characterized by security rather than constant activation. And it requires accepting that some relationships, no matter how intense the feelings, are fundamentally incompatible and need to end so both people can find dynamics that actually support their well-being rather than triggering their wounds. This isn't about perfect relationships or perfect people. It's about recognizing when a pattern is creating suffering rather than growth, when intensity is being mistaken for intimacy, when the loop has become the relationship rather than just a challenge within the relationship. These unspoken signs reveal whether the foundation is secure enough to build on, or whether the entire structure is maintained by two people's incompatible attempts to feel safe. Seeing that clearly, painful as it is, creates the possibility of something genuinely different, either within the current relationship if both people commit to changing their patterns, or in the next relationship after doing the necessary internal work. The loop only has power when it operates invisibly. Once seen, once named, once understood, it can finally be interrupted. And that interruption, difficult as it is to achieve, might be the most important relationship work anyone ever does.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.